We're back again. Kyle, what's going on this week? How you been, man?
I think the first thing that's going on is we've reversed roles here, and you're kicking us off.
Yeah.
So we're trying that out, but been a busy week so far. We're putting the final touches on a couple upcoming events that Josh has been heading up, and really oversubscribed in Chicago next week for a great dinner with some both clients, prospects, and partners, and then also a Cubs game. I think that's the third or fourth year in a row that we're doing that. So that's been good. Happy to be doing that one again. I know you're gonna be up there as well. So that's great. And then also prepping for a talk I'm doing up in Boston. I guess the week after that. So busy month on that front. And then even just this last week, went down to Atlanta with one of our team members and attended as a Derby watch party, but it was to benefit an organization named Tech Bridge, which is a nonprofit that was pretty interesting. Like, I was actually just learning about them. They've got a couple different sides to their business, but one aspect of it is really kind of technology support to other nonprofits. Supporting other nonprofits and their technology needs with some software they developed, as well as it looks like maybe some development type work that they'll come in and do on Salesforce or different things that nonprofits need. But the other side that's pretty interesting is, they're working with part of their mission statement is to end generational poverty, right? And so they're working with, people and organizations that may not even recognize the opportunities that are in the technology industry and the IT industry. And even if they do recognize it, don't necessarily have the access and placement they need or the training that they need to go and take advantage of it. Which is really interesting to me because, you and I, like, coming from the military, when we were coming out, we didn't know that this industry existed, or our little corner or niche of it existed. And so, I thought that was a great mission. And I think the Derby watch party raised like $10,000, to support that nonprofit. So that was pretty cool.
Nice. So they're a nonprofit that works with other nonprofits.
Yeah, really two sides to it, right? So they've got an aspect of it where they're supporting other nonprofits, and it's almost like a little meta. But through that, they're also able to train and develop and basically do a workforce development aspect to it that gets additional people into the workforce.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it kind of works as an incubator or a training pipeline, while also benefiting those nonprofits, but then getting resources that are now marketable out into the work. Training up resources. That's really cool.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I talked to one of the gentlemen down there about the training pipeline. I mean, it's like 16 weeks. It's pretty intensive, requires high commitment from the participants, but they've got a really great placement rate, and generally those people are also going on to see promotions.
Yeah, I think, that's super interesting because I think those two combined, without the risk of sounding obvious, like those two things combined, especially in the IT world, are kind of the biggest barriers to entry. Is one, like, how do I accumulate that knowledge and experience in some kind of pipeline that I can get, and then how do I get access to the job opportunities, right?
Yeah, I mean, if you don't know someone that's in it, I mean, it's really, really difficult, right? And I mean, they're taking people who are maybe working in restaurants or convenience stores or that type of thing, and that's just all that they've known, and giving them that exposure. And so I thought learning, I really enjoyed one. I mean, it was a great event, but also enjoyed learning about their mission and their approach to it. So it's kind of what I've been up to, I guess, over the last week. Obviously a whole lot of work mixed in there with that, but that event was a lot of fun. So
awesome. Good stuff.
Cool. I guess we'll get into the meat of it today, and jump right into our next segment.
Cue that school bell. Today, Kyle, we're going to be talking about technical debt. All right.
Mm.
What it is, when and where to use it, where to avoid it, kind of how to think about it, how it kind of breaks down into different buckets. Some ways in which it can spin out of control, just like other forms of debt. And then how to mitigate that, how to think about it into, even like a budget line item when you talk about your resources. So, starting at the top, what is technical debt? Scouring the internet, there's a lot of different opinions, a lot of different variations of what people call it. And some people use it as, it's kind of an overused word, or it's got too kind of ambiguous. But really, I think of it as where you've made a decision, and we'll talk about like knowingly or unknowingly, in either some form of IT, right? So a lot of times people think of it as code, but it could be infrastructure, it could be any part of your IT function or department, where you've made a decision where the expected system value and then what you're actually delivering is somewhere less than that, right? So which is going to at some point require rework. Some people use the word shortcut. That's got an implication to it, that you're not giving your best effort. Whereas, like, I think if you're doing it right, it's like an intentionality to it. Now, what I would say is, in the way that I look at technical debt is different than a technical constraint, right? So technical debt is something that I can pay off, versus a technical constraint or restraint is something that I'm like actually physically bound by, right? And so some of that may be a compliance thing, or a regulatory thing, that makes it so I have to engineer or build something in a certain way, that may not be the most technically optimal, but is a requirement, right? I think that is more of a constraint and not really debt, because I can't pay that off, right? It's something that exists.
Seems like that would change over time, though, right? Because you may have a constraint, but as technology develops, that thing that used to be a constraint all of a sudden becomes a debt in some ways.
Yes, yeah. I think it could over time, but I would think about those somewhat differently, right? That a technical debt is, especially when you're taking it on in the beginning, is something that you're choosing to, for lack of a better word, take a shortcut on, like an MVP or some type of feature release where it's not a fully baked solution, either in the code or in the infrastructure, but you release it early. And there's a lot of reasons why to do that, right? Like if you're thinking about, well, there's a timing in the market that we want to capitalize on. We don't have time to spend a year in development building the most robust feature or function. We need to get to market quicker. Or there's some other type of compliance or regulatory thing that is coming down the pipe that you need to be ready for. The other piece is kind of feature release, or if you want to do a proof of concept and release part of it out to see if it gets the traction that you believe is there before you actually devote the entire amount of resources to it, right? And then you go back and kind of rework and rebuild it. So those are some reasons of why to use. I think when we think of debt, we always have kind of a negative connotation, but just like with certain forms of debt, like there is legitimate use cases for it, which are actually beneficial to your organization and can actually save you money in the long term if it's used appropriately. So how that breaks down, think about it as almost like this kind of 4 grid squares. So two different access planes, right? And so on your vertical, think of above the line being deliberate. So you deliberately took on this debt, and then below the line being accidental, like you didn't actually know that you were doing it. And then left and right, think of reckless versus prudent. So reckless, where if you're in that top corner, even where you were deliberate but reckless. So you chose to, you knew you were taking on the debt, but reckless, meaning that you don't have a plan to pay it off, right? Versus, hey, we're deliberate, but we're also being prudent. So that meaning where we are taking on this debt, but we have a plan for it. We have a plan to, to pay it off over time, or that we're knowingly doing it. Whereas then you kind of go into those bottom squares where you're accidental and reckless. That's probably the one you want to stay out of, which is, you didn't know you were doing it, and partially because you weren't taking the time to actually think about the system correctly from the beginning. And then the other one is, one that just happens. You almost have to kind of plan for it, where it was prudent, right? Where you were going through the steps and doing proper planning and doing that. But you still end up where it's like, okay, I built this thing, man, now that we're on the other end of it, I wish I would have done it a different way. And this, you think about this in the physical world, right? Where you plan, you're going to paint this room, and you go do test samples, and you hold up the card to the thing, and you paint a section of it, and you're like, yep, I really like it. You paint the whole room, and a year later, you're like, man, I really wish I would have painted it different.
Right.
So like, even with all the planning, you can still end up in this kind of prudent, but accidental technical debt. So those are kind of the four that we see, and kind of what's the most common framework to think about where that technical debt arises. That accidental reckless can be dangerous because it's technical debt that you don't even know that you're buying, right? That you've accidentally done it and you're kind of reckless about it. If you're going to do it, you typically want to be in that deliberate and prudent where you've done the proper planning, you know the debt you're taking on, and have a plan to fix it over the long term. You kind of want to stay away from being deliberate but reckless. That's just saying like, yeah, I know I'm doing it, but I don't actually have a plan to do anything about it. That's typically not a great answer. And then that other one that we talked about is just kind of know that it exists, that you're going to build things, and then as a function of building it, learn lessons along the way about how you wish you would have built it different. Right?
So fair to say that just the sheer act of building anything, you're going to accumulate technical debt.
Yeah. Oh yeah. And again, I mean, we see this, if you draw an analogy, like you see that in the physical world, right? Like the house that I bought the first time, and the way that layout is, I thought it was one thing of, I even talked to my wife about this, where I thought entryways were a massive waste of square footage, right? I was like, I don't want an entryway, because it's just a waste. Well, fast forward and have a house without an entryway, and I'm like, man, I really wish that.
Yeah, especially with 3 kids.
Yeah, like having a spot where they have a decompression zone before they get to the actual main compartment of the house. So, again, is an analogy. I think that those are things that happen, within the IT space. And then you're kind of measuring, right? Expected value versus, actual system value. And the delta there is essentially your technical debt. So how that spins out of control is just like normal debt, right? There's an interest component to this, that if you're not paying it down, the more and more you build on top of these systems, the more dependent they are on that form of technical debt. And then, the world around us is not stationary, and especially in the technical world, right? So if you were from, point A to point B was this far, well, what's happening is the world around you is actually progressing technologically. So your ability to catch up is not only an interest, but it's a compounding interest, or it's growing exponentially if you don't pay it down. So, one of the things that is a best practice to think about with technical debt is to actually dedicate time, people, money, and resource to paying it down in the same way that you would pay down financial debt. And sometimes that's really tough for the business side of a company to handle or to take, because in the same way, like you're paying off that debt, you're not actually getting anything in return, right? Like you're just getting less debt. So sometimes you won't see like, well, we had our IT department spend X amount of weeks specifically focused on technical debt. What did I get in return? What features, what, improvement to bottom line did I actually see? Well, maybe nothing, right? But you've enabled future growth, or you've kept that interest payment lower, because eventually you let it spin out. Like your entire IT team becomes focused on nothing but the interest payment. In the same way, again, in the same way financial debt happens.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen that in some organizations. You go in and it's so pervasive that a lot of their time is spent managing outdated systems, but and
Yep.
then they can't get out in front of it, where they really need to, and like the cost of not getting out in front of it today is much higher than it was, 10 years ago, right? Like
Yep.
most IT departments I work with, at least the forward leaning ones, they're very, very focused on how do I, you know, get to a place to where I'm working on the things that are actually strategic to the business, forward looking, that sort of stuff. But they're hampered by, the resource cost and resource drain of keeping current systems, running.
Now I will say the one difference that I see between the financial debt analogy and the technical debt analogy is that it's too easy to take on technical debt, right?
Mhm.
Like you don't ever have to go to a bank and sign for the loan in technical
Right.
debt, right? Like, and so I think that people, especially on the business side, are all too easy or eager to just be like, yeah, it's future problems, because they don't want to fully fund something or take the time. But then, again, like you are, whether you're writing that check or not, you are taking on that loan. So I think it's something that you need to be more intentional about. Again, there are great use cases for it, so it's not always a bad thing. And it just, like we said, like the world around us is changing, so it happens naturally. Like you're going to build this debt, but doing it intentionally and having a plan to continuously pay it down so that it doesn't become this stranglehold on your IT organization where their entire time is break fix and just keeping the lights on.
This feels like a hotter topic, today than it was 5 years ago. What is
Yep.
changing that? Why are people looking at this more, thinking about this more, talking about this more?
Yeah, I mean, I think two main components: the move to cloud and the talk around AI. Right, like
Mhm.
both of those have a heavy implication around around technical debt. Right, where, well, hey, we want to move into the cloud. It's like, well, is your application or are your workloads configured in a way that are going to be suitable in a cloud environment? Are they going to perform the right way? Are they going to be cost prohibitive? And then again, with AI, or as we talked about, data strategy, is your data configured in the right way to leverage some of these newer technologies, to take advantage of some of the agility and the business intelligence that you can derive from it. Well, if you've got a ton of technical debt, like you don't get to reap the benefits of that quite yet, right? You've got to go back and clean up some stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So it really slows you down.
Yeah, yeah, it really does become like almost think of it as like if you're trying to run or be agile, every time you take on a piece of technical debt, it's like taking a string and like tying this little string to you. And then the next one, and the first one isn't a big deal. It's not going to slow you down, but all of a sudden you end up in this like ball of yarn, and you can't even move because you're in this like stranglehold of debt.
Yeah. Yeah. Good stuff. I mean, look, I know that this will continue to be a topic. I mean, we've had quite a few conversations. It's interesting, actually. Some of the conversations I've had around this aren't just like with our clients. It's actually when we're talking about and evaluating vendors and looking at them, especially. Mostly, this has happened in the contact center space because
Yep.
it's a technology that's been around a long time. Contact center as a service, um, and I guess a little bit newer that people are pursuing procuring it as a service. They used to license it and put it on their own premise and do that sort of thing. But some of these providers really hadn't updated the actual software that much. They had taken what they were doing, put it in a co-location facility, or data center, and then sold it as a service to clients. And there's a noticeable difference between the providers that have done that versus those that are cloud native or have developed it differently.
Oh yeah.
And you can see it, right? I mean, you can feel it, and so it's been a topic of conversations that I've had, not just on the client side, but when we're going out and evaluating vendors. How much technical debt do these vendors have, and how's that going to impact our clients who are looking to consume that technology?
Yeah, I mean, I think of both in some of the call it more blocking and tackling parts of it. Their reliability and uptime type stuff. But even on top of that is what we call like product velocity. How often are they iterating and coming out with that new feature? Again, if they're spending 90% of their time just doing break fix on some of this technical debt and keeping these old systems alive, that's a cost to the business that they would otherwise be putting towards new features and moving that that product forward, right, to meet growing customer demands, right? Like the customer is always demanding more and more out of the systems that they use. And as a product or as a vendor, like you have to be able to meet that demand.
Yeah, for sure. Well, look, I appreciate the education. This will continue to be a topic. It is going to be a long time before. Well, one, I guess, there's always going to be technical debt, but even what is out there right now, even on legacy systems, it is going to take a long time to retire that. This is going to continue to be a topic for the foreseeable future.
Oh yeah. Yeah. I don't know that anything is ever future proof, aside from was it death and taxes? It's like two things that have actually managed to be future proof. So any form of IT, like you're going to have to continue to look to iterate and innovate.
Great. Thanks, dude.
Yeah.
All right. I think that's a wrap on today's session.